it'd be quite easy for me to stand here and say resurrection magic is problematic in games and in world building because it trivialises death and means there's no ultimate consequence to recklessness. But that would be both a cold take and the words of a coward. Whether we think it inspires the sort of player behaviour we want to see or not, the fact remains that in many settings, resurrection is a reality. There are so many ways for characters, especially in D&D style worlds, to return from death, from revenants to rituals, revivify to reincarnation. And unless you ban them all, these methods of returning after death are a known quantity to the peoples of your world. Which means the fact of resurrection is going to shape how all societies and all cultures worldwide interact with death and what comes next. Which also means that any well-established society is going to have to tackle some quite complex questions, such as, can you inherit from yourself? Are princes who take over from their fathers when their fathers die only holding on to their country temporarily? Do debts disappear on death? Do marriages? Do you stop being an elf if you reincarnate as a dwarf? And how long should the authorities wait before legally considering someone to be dead? This is the cool world-building stuff we can do when we just accept a rather silly premise that resurrection is cheap, relatively, and relatively plentiful. And to lessen your cognitive load, today I want to present 3 different societies with completely different attitudes to all of the questions we've just mentioned and many more, all of whom may coexist within the same world or even potentially within the same country under different religio-legal systems perhaps. To help demonstrate that even those mechanics that most annoy players of games like D&D can lead to some really, really interesting world-building consequences, if we just take them seriously. First, we're going to look at a culture who are well-established international traders, pioneers in finance and taxation, who have got to where they are partly by taking the lead in developments like creating limited liability corporations. Basically, the Dutch of the 17th century. This is a nation that reflects some of our modern views of debt and taxes. The critical question is, of course, what happens to your stuff and your money when you die? And also, secondarily, is death easily definable? I can see a nation powered by its trade, stocks and finances having a rather short grace period for the time that one can be actually dead, at least a time period that's going to cause you no financial effect. I would also imagine that this grace period to be revived after your death would probably coincide with the tax year, or with monthly or quarterly reporting. If you stay dead, or even just missing, perhaps lost at sea for more than that time, or it crosses one of those boundaries, then it is very likely that your estate is going to be garnished for inheritance or forfeiture proceedings. Rich people would be therefore heavily incentivized to make plans in case of their untimely death. Commission a cleric who guarantees that they are going to arrive before that time limit is up, no matter what. But rich people would also want robust plans in place for if they need to stay dead. Death therefore might become some sort of an extreme form of bankruptcy for the most debt-destroyed individuals to die, have their estate broken up and given away, allowing their creditors to take absolutely everything, and then potentially being resurrected as part of an agreement. As this nation may well have laws that treat a newly resurrected person who has had all of their assets seized as a new legal entity? Yes, with no money, but perhaps also with no debt. If this were the case, we might see squabbles, we might see grave robbing, and secret resurrections to ensure that that clean slate of death is not achieved, so that creditors can keep squeezing people who owe them, to ensure that someone who's defaulted is going to keep working to pay off everything they have, rather than take the easy way out. We might also see reincarnation, returning someone into a different body, used as a tactic to try and rob people of the estate that they do have. Potentially tied in with grave robbing, you bring someone back as someone completely different, they can't prove their identity, and all of a sudden their estate falls into default and everyone gets paid out. Life insurances, or even stipends, regular stipends for military service or for large-scale donations, might also need significant alterations in a society like this. Perhaps these too disappear on your first death, leading to an underground market on off-the-books secret resurrections if someone dies in a non-public fashion, making sure that they can keep collecting their stipends, for instance. We might also see death investigators more interested in catching fraudsters who are on their first or second return than actually solving murders. Finally, our fantasy Dutch Republic would have quite a hard time dealing with familial inheritance and inheritance tax. To me, it makes sense for such a financially developed system to have a rather complex legal code which makes each person of some significant means into a company of their own, with a set of limited shares distributed across any interested parties, such as creditors, families, educational institutions as a form of a scholarship or grant or loan, student loan perhaps, or faiths even. This way, on death, a person's stuff isn't immediately cannibalised on the next tick over of tax in some sort of mad inheritance scramble, but their stuff then gets managed by a board of stakeholders, all of whom are paid some form of dividend or interest on their shares, whether the person is dead or alive. And while the person is dead and not making money, these dividends would be paid from the personal shares of the person who the company is named after. The controlling shares, the actual ownership of their own personal life and assets. Too many deaths or resurrections, too many shares given out, or too many bad deals, and a person's going to lose voting control of their own company, and therefore potentially their own stuff, and maybe even, if we're going really dark on this, their own person. They may end up retired, being paid on dividends while their entire estate is run by their children, or their creditors, or a mixture of all of these. Eventually, it wouldn't even be worth them dying and being resurrected. They may just decouple from their own estate via old age, leaving the company to persist in control of its majority stakeholders. It is a dystopian vision, perhaps, but I think it would be an effective way of insulating a succession or inheritance tax against the possibility of multiple deaths and resurrections, without the double, triple, quadruple or quintuple jeopardy that comes with paying inheritance tax on their estate every time someone dies. This isn't the only way of doing it though, and it may be too technical to have included at the start of this video if I'm being reflective for a moment. Oh well, we're going to continue with another potential version of what could legally and socially happen if attitudes on death and resurrection are slightly different. That may be how a burgeoning capitalist society does it, but it's not the only way. Next, we're going to crib from Christianity and Arthurian legends a little bit. The concept: the true king of this land or world will return from death on their appointed time. In a world that believes things like this, bodies are kept, tombs preserved for as long as it is possible to do so. In D&D's case, the resurrection return limit is 200 years, barring wish shenanigans, which I'm not getting into. But it's going to be entirely system dependent on whatever sort of magic you're using. A side note: a lot of what I'm about to discuss is lessened in impact somewhat if we consider clone to be a form of resurrection too. And especially if we use the official rules that say resurrection cannot be effective if a creature died of old age. If both of these are in the mix, then wealthy folks on their deathbed would be heavily incentivized to get themselves cloned and succeed as a younger version of themselves, or to get killed before their natural time comes, sort of executed so that they can then be either cloned to be younger in the future or resurrected to do some important task. Essentially, whatever the case, you're looking to clone yourself rather than actually ever die of old age. Also, old age isn't really a way to die. Like, yes, we use it colloquially, but generally the way people die is organ failure of some variety. You can't just die of being old. You don't just turn to dust. Your bones turn to dust. It's a silly definition anyway, and doesn't make a great deal of sense in any practical, functional use case. I mean, yes, of course, we all know what happens when someone dies of old age, but if we're being truly pedantic, it's a nonsense term that has no real benefit to the game. But back to our once and future kingdom. A nation founded in war, in which a great unifying leader stepped up to unite the people and drive out a great evil. Lovely stuff. That great leader dies. Not of old age. And the nation's people choose to keep their bodies safe. If ever they need their wisdom or leadership or unification power again, in a time of crisis, perhaps. Thus, sort of, the country is being held in reserve by that person's descendants or whoever's in charge, ruled in absentia, while they still treat their great initial unifying king as the true ruler. And this attitude to resurrection as a way to hold something for someone else who's going to come back later would also trickle down into society as well. A great patriarch or business owner might be seen, to all intents and purposes, to still be running their family or their business, using the name recognitions and connection that come from that long-dead patriarch or business founder. That authority, therefore, backed up by the physical possession of that person's corpse, ready to come back at any time to seal a deal. Perhaps that authority does degrade to some extent over time as people forget how magnetic that individual was. Or perhaps it degrades all at once as a family or business is perceived as not having even the funds to spend on such a resurrection to bring that person back. But now we're going to properly include this 200-year time limit on resurrections. With this, that ancestral authority is limited time only. So each business or family might just need to preserve multiple ancestors to have that ongoing rolling effect of legitimacy, of holding something for the boss. Or they might even need to pick a new patriarch or matriarch to represent their interests at some point before that 200-year timer runs out. However long a setting's resurrection limit is, whether that's simply a practical limit of decomposition or a magical limit, as we see in D&D, and also assuming we're barring any forms of permanent immortality or managed immortality like vampirism or cloning, the real problem comes when one must transfer that legendary authority who was supposed to one day return and cannot anymore. That's the danger zone. Does a nation bring back its legendary hero founder for one day, a celebration every 10, 100 years, just to receive their wisdom before they're ritually slaughtered and then stored in a box for the future? Could it be that one day they decide to let that legend die in perpetuity, either because society has moved on, the body has been stolen or destroyed in some capacity, or perhaps a new monarchic hero presents themselves in modernity and supplants the legacy of King Arthur or whatever? For this culture then, death is not an event that comes by surprise. A person on their last legs may beg to have their suffering ended, and potentially be brought back or be a help to their family by the virtue of their reputation and the virtue of the fact that they can be revived if needs be. Just in case their legacy's enough to get them a future, a helpful future. An unexpected or untimely death is not mourned so much as it is accepted. A timer then started on a time limit to bring them back, on an afterlife status that can be held, power can be held in their name for a certain length of time. For such a culture then, death would be perceived not as an instant thing, or as a change of state, but rather as a sort of multi-year, multi-stage process, whereby every time it gets harder or more expensive to bring you back, every gradation of that time frame, you are more dead until the moment at which you cannot be brought back, at which your name fades from the amount of tools that your family or your business can use as a leverage. This gives us some pretty interesting social behaviours. Resurrection refreshes, we've already discussed. But bodily preservation would be a massively important part of this culture. Bodies would not be left just in the grounds of a home or some holy site. They would be guarded, secured under lock and key, kept nearby the critical functions of a place, just in case they're needed. Biographies and records would be so important. You'd need some knowledge of a person's life and times and how they died and how to bring them back and how long they've been dead, just to manage the logistics of this social practice. If the great tower in the centre of a city has developed a fault, you need to make sure you're actually asking the lead architect, not some guy who was an airborne general. And specifically for this culture, hostage-taking, body-snatching and kidnapping may be among the worst crimes you can effect. Any army would be accompanied by its cataloguers and biographers, a massive logistical operation to ensure that the competent dead were not lost. And we'd see government agents who are trained in necromancy to speak with the dead and carrying resources for resurrection with them, if any of them can cast it. But we can get weirder. In regions infested with undead, where, say, vampires are a major concern, or with strong religious beliefs against resurrection, it is likely that, as well as social taboos, we might see legal and actual prohibitions against resurrection, in the full knowledge that resurrection can and does happen. Perhaps this starts as a precaution against shapeshifters, moving in and assuming the identities of the dead, or the missing, presumed dead, wherein anyone who returns alone from a seemingly deadly expedition is shunned. Or perhaps this begins with someone who has been resurrected and who is open about it. But in such a society, we'd see an absolute social rejection of the returner. A refusal to call them by their former names or titles. A refusal to allow any personal feelings towards the person they used to be to affect their treatment. And an insistence on this person being, functionally, socially and legally, a newborn adult. This base model could be presented in two ways, as cheated or played straight. If a king is seen to be an avatar of a deity, then it is just the deity's wish and whim that that king returns looking exactly the same as the previous guy did. Nobles could have clandestine agreements across borders to trade families if they die to escape this social tax of being reduced to nothing socially at the moment you are dead, using physical distance and long-standing agreements to move one's wealth around, abusing the social taboo of questioning a returner about their past life to set up wards, essentially, among long-term allies. A system of wardship that allows people to persist even after they've died, even in a society which heavily critiques it. This is just the mysterious stranger who stays with us now. Not the king from over there, the noble from over there who died just 2 months ago. No, this is our friend. It's likely also that the wealthy, in a sort of cheated version of this society, would be more willing to establish things like safe houses, stash houses for a lot of their wealth in case they need to return from death. Or they'd invest heavily in foreign interests and enterprises, perhaps to hide money away if they need resurrection, or just to get out of Dodge before their time comes and before they need a resurrection. To move to a different country where these laws are not so restrictive. But if we're running this concept straight down the line with no cheeky exploits by the wealthy classes, which I would say are very likely to happen in fairness if this system is introduced, but if we're running it straight, then we might see a society built around gifting, legacy, and the conspicuous use of money near the end of one's life. And any untimely death without hosting some great feast and conspicuous giving away of wealth first would be considered a great tragedy, not just for the people who didn't get anything. Charity may indeed be the ultimate purview of the dying, especially if inheritance is limited or even outlawed, perhaps due to those historic shapeshifters that have been trying to infiltrate families and claim inheritances that were not theirs. People who seek to actually violate the taboo on resurrection and come back after untimely deaths might, in life, donate to social safety nets, ensuring that even the lowest of the low, the resurrected, can get basic communal resources. If they're desperate to come back, they may fund such social programs. Such a society would also be quite interesting in terms of its immigration policy too. Its cold but tolerant acceptance of any person who shows up within its borders might be quite desirable for any exile forced to start a new life, especially with those taboos about asking a newborn adult or naturalised citizen about their past. Although I'd imagine this is likely a last resort for anyone who really needs just somewhere to take them in, because these newborn adults will likely be marked, shunned, and perhaps treated as second-class citizens. Ultimately, the greatest social effect of this sort of a society would be to turn the modern life path on its head. In this society, it would be the responsibility of the aged to take on risk. Not to retire, but to use their amassed wealth somehow for the good of society. With no second chances at life, it would be cruel or immoral to ask the youth to risk their lives in the mines or warfare, when they don't even have time to give away and benefit to those they love before they die. Instead, one's youth is spent in luxury, supported by the people and social safety nets, building up reputation and money slowly. And when one has raised children, and to succeed them and to be given gifts, then the generosity begins. Not just donations of funds and things, but also time and body. After spending their money on their treasured people, the ultimate sacrifice may well be made. Old people adventurous, old knights, queens, lords, or merchants may choose the adventurer's path in life. In their retirement, willingly choosing to leave their society, to die by the standards of their society, to abandon their former name, identity and titles, to begin anew at this ripe old age. After all, adventurers are those who are most commonly revived, known to return from death. They are essentially legally nomadic exiles who exist outside the norms of any given society. This adventuring retirement is a way to embrace finality, and perhaps a way to make sure that your loved ones aren't tempted to try and bring you back from death. Strike out into the wilds, and if you become a great success in this new adventuring life, well, maybe some of that wealth gets sent home from an anonymous source, of course. So there we have it, 3 very different responses to the big question: when are you actually dead? The moment of death? When your stuff is actually legally forfeit? When you can no longer come back? Or when your deeds and impacts are forgotten? I don't know if there is one answer. I think, personally, philosophically, there are many kinds of death. But I know that the existence of resurrection in a world would provide a dizzying host of different answers. Answers which are worth exploring and contrasting with each other when it comes to world building. And so please, use these ideas. Add your own to them. And remember, just one change in social attitude can create a vibrant, potent, and fascinating culture. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.